Hello everyone and welcome back to Anomalous Archive, where we post scary stories to help you sleep. Please comment where you are listening to my videos from, since I believe it would be fun for all of us to know. Also, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for helping me reach to 50 subscribers. Let's reach 100 subscribers before the end of January. So sit back, relax and enjoy. I want to tell you about my wife. Her name is Elizabeth Watson. A beautiful girl, brunette, with green eyes encircled by a yellow ring around the pupil. She doesn't particularly believe in God, magic, or horoscopes, but I've noticed a certain tendency toward mysticism in her. Elizabeth doesn't like to stay alone in the apartment. She says she feels someone else's presence. It's probably no surprise that as soon as we met, we moved in together rather quickly. She wanted me to always be nearby. Recently, we got a cat named Whiskers. My wife adores her, can't get enough of her, and calls her Fluffball. Sometimes the cat behaves as if she sees or hears something in the living room, staring and walking over to investigate, but there's nothing there. Elizabeth takes such behavior seriously and says with a hint of fear, "But the cat must sense something, right?" For a long time, I didn't understand the reason for her wariness. Recently, she confessed, sharing an incredible story from her youth. What follows is her story, in her own words. This happened a long time ago when Elizabeth was preparing to enter university. There was a brief period when she had the fortune of living alone. One morning, she was woken up by sunlight streaming through the curtains. Silence, with only the soft chirping of sparrows outside the window. Stretching, she enjoyed the freedom. Her parents and younger brother had gone to visit relatives for 2 weeks, leaving the apartment free of the usual noise and commotion. She had opted out of the trip to prepare for her entrance exams, a decision she didn't regret. The morning silence was just one of the perks of her temporary solitude. Elizabeth could eat whatever she wanted, watch TV late into the night, and most importantly, hang out with friends until the early hours. She lay in bed, thinking about how she would spend the day, when suddenly the silence was broken by a sound. Faint but distinct footsteps, as if someone was walking through the apartment. Elizabeth flinched. Could she have forgotten to lock the door last night? She was never particularly cautious and had grown used to living freely without her mother's constant reminders to lock up. Upon waking, she couldn't recall whether she had locked the door after returning from her nighttime stroll. Her dry throat tightened painfully. She listened carefully. From the kitchen came the sound of someone's steps and muttering. There was definitely a stranger in the apartment. Elizabeth slowly got out of bed, trying not to make a sound. She grabbed a t-shirt and shorts from the chair, dressed quickly, and slightly opened the door to the hallway. Someone was walking around in the bathroom, muttering nonsense under their breath. "Just make the move, the bathworm will eat you." The voice was muffled, hoarse, and indeterminate, neither clearly male nor female. Elizabeth peeked out of her room. The apartment door to the stairwell was wide open, and someone had brazenly taken advantage of it. Suddenly, a plump figure darted from the hallway into the living room. It moved so quickly that Elizabeth couldn't make out the details, but realized it was a woman. The footsteps and nonsensical muttering, resembling incantations, resumed. Deciding to confront the uninvited guest, Elizabeth steeled herself and entered the living room. In the corner stood a gray-haired old woman dressed in a dirty, faded shirt and a long dark skirt. Her ashen hair stuck out in all directions, and her wrinkled face was smudged with dirt. The old woman stood motionless, raising her hands above her head and muttering. "Sharp-thorn scourge, so the eyes stay sharp." The woman stared madly at Elizabeth, as if she had stepped out of a nightmare or the pages of old fairy tales about wicked witches. "What are you doing here?" Elizabeth screamed. The old woman fell silent and lowered her hands. Her mouth opened wide, like a dark rat's burrow. Inside were just 2 brown teeth, 2 rotten fangs. Ah, cackled the crazy old woman. The sound was so horrifying and piercing that Elizabeth froze for several seconds. She didn't know what to do. What if this woman was dangerous? The old woman was large, her hands sinewy and strong. Elizabeth felt her blood run cold. She squeezed her eyes shut, unwilling to look at the insane intruder. The gray-haired hag, as if mocking her fear, laughed louder and louder. "Get out!" Elizabeth shouted. "Get out of my home!" "Ah," said the old woman, as if surprised that someone was yelling at her. Her face showed hurt. Her pursed lips trembled, and her eyes glistened with tears. I'll go, the deed is done anyway," she said and stomped forward. Elizabeth stepped aside, letting her pass. The old woman did nothing to her, simply walked toward the open stairwell door. "Crazy old hag," Elizabeth muttered, though she understood her anger should be directed at herself. That's what locks are for, to keep mad people from barging in uninvited. And someone worse could have come instead. The old woman turned at the doorway one more time. Her gaze sparkled with malicious sparks in the dim light. The hag grimaced and stuck out her tongue at Elizabeth. Such a gesture from an adult seemed grotesque and ugly. Then the woman stepped out onto the landing and went downstairs. Elizabeth closed the door. Her heart was still pounding with fear. To tell someone about this was as good as admitting her own confusion. Better if no one knew, she decided, especially her relatives. Otherwise, the reproaches would be inevitable. Struggling to catch her breath, the girl looked around the apartment. Everything seemed to be in its place. Nothing was missing or damaged, not even a dirty footprint left behind. Yet she still felt an urge to scrub the entire apartment with detergent and foam. Who knows what trash the hag had been rummaging through. "I'll never leave the door open again," Elizabeth repeated to herself as she scrubbed the floor with a mop. She devoted the entire day to cleaning, then sat down with her textbooks. She wanted to distract her thoughts from what had happened in the morning. Just as she had settled into her reading, the doorbell rang. Elizabeth felt a shiver run through her. She wasn't expecting any guests, but she still went to the hallway and asked in a trembling voice, "Who's there?" "Hello, you have a package," a kind young voice answered. "What package?" "I didn't order anything," she replied, but hesitated. Maybe her parents had ordered something again to add to their collection of coins, badges, or old banknotes, which Elizabeth's father loved to collect. She looked through the peephole. A skinny guy with long bangs stood outside, wearing blue jeans and a black t-shirt, holding a small cardboard box in the shape of a cube. He looked harmless enough, so Elizabeth decided to open the door. "Please take this," the boy said, handing her the box. "Are you sure you're not mistaken?" Elizabeth asked doubtfully. "Who is it for?" "For Elizabeth Watson," the courier said. "Is that you?" She nodded. "What's in it, and who's it from?" "It's all paid for. Please accept it." The boy looked at Elizabeth with big blue eyes, seeming so genuine that she wanted to believe him. It seemed like he was just doing his job. "All right, maybe my parents decided to surprise me," she said, taking the box. It wasn't heavy at all. "Goodbye," the courier said and went down the stairs. "Don't you need my signature?" she called after him. "No need," he replied without turning back. Elizabeth closed the door and took the package to the living room. There was no name or address on the box. A friend must have arranged this. But for what occasion? So many unanswered questions. Suppressing her unease, Elizabeth carefully peeled off the tape and opened the box. Inside was a sheet of paper with faintly printed text. "Jaws. Wind up and place on the floor." Exercise caution. What nonsense, Elizabeth said, but her curiosity was piqued. Wrapped in newspaper, she unwrapped it. Inside was a toy, jaws molded from a material that didn't feel like plastic. The pink gums were matte and soft, while the teeth were white, hard, and felt like real bone. All the teeth were sharp, not human nor animal-like. Inside was a dry, rough tongue. At the back of the toy was a small wind-up key, not metallic but carved from bone. The thing looked so realistic that it was revolting. Elizabeth threw the jaws back into the box. She didn't even think about winding it up, but decided not to throw the strange package away just yet. Maybe the sender would reveal themselves and explain their actions. If my little brother came up with this, his prank is just stupid. But if some stranger did this, Elizabeth shuddered as a chill ran through her. All it took was staying home for a little while, and now the weirdness starts. First, the crazy old woman, and now this package. The box was shoved into a closet, out of sight, out of mind. I'll deal with it later, she decided, and went back to her textbooks. The next day began as usual. Elizabeth was woken by warm sunlight, but memories of the previous day still didn't let her completely relax. She woke up feeling anxious and decided to distract herself by preparing a delicious breakfast. And then the doorbell rang again. "Who's there?" "A package for you," said the now familiar voice. Elizabeth opened the door. The same courier stood in the hallway with a new box in his hands. "Young man, this isn't funny," she exclaimed. "Tell me right now, who is sending this?" The boy swallowed nervously and replied, I'm just supposed to deliver this to you. I don't need your package. And don't come back here again." Elizabeth was so angry that she began to shout. The courier seemed frightened. He looked away, placed the box on the floor, and said, "Then I'll just leave it here. Sorry, but it's very important." Elizabeth felt awkward, though she couldn't tell if the boy was in on the prank or just a messenger. "Very important," she mused. "Fine, I'll see what it is this time." She brought the box inside, tore off the tape. Another note. Pipe cleaner for drain worms. Instructions. Pour the contents of the bottle into the bathroom drain to poison the worm. It is recommended to wear gloves. If the product comes into contact with skin, rinse thoroughly with water. "A circus," Elizabeth said, unwrapping the newspaper. Inside was a half-liter plastic bottle with a bright green liquid. The label showed a cross-section of a pipe with something long, disgusting, and toothed inside. "Worms don't grow that big, let alone have spikes in their mouths," she muttered. She threw the bottle into the box, and suddenly the mad words of the dirty old woman came to mind. That one had muttered something about a bathroom worm. Remembering this, Elizabeth felt for the first time that she missed her parents. They would have helped her figure out her problems. Another box was sent to the closet. Dad will come back and sort this out. That day, Elizabeth decided to take a break from textbooks and dive into the world of entertaining literature. She absolutely adored Harry Potter and all kinds of detective stories. She devoured them voraciously, sometimes not even noticing how weekends flew by with yet another detective novel. She settled onto the sofa, which sagged softly under her weight, brewed herself some coffee, and inhaled its aroma with delight. Thoughts of difficult tasks receded into the background. She opened a page and, dangling one leg to the floor, began to read. Suddenly, a sharp pain pierced her ankle. Elizabeth jerked and looked down. On the carpet crawled a multitude of tiny creatures. She couldn't understand what she was seeing. These beings were no larger than mice, bald and tailless. Their elongated snouts with sharp needles resembled nightmarish proboscises. Dozens of small animals scurried across the carpet on short legs, their black eyes glittering, snorting furiously. "What the heck are these?" Elizabeth whispered in fear. She had never seen such creatures and couldn't understand where they had come from. The tiny animals were fidgety and energetic. They jumped at the edge of the sofa, trying to climb up. A crimson droplet of blood appeared on her leg. Elizabeth quickly grabbed a slipper from the floor and, in a panic, struck one of the sharp-snouted creatures. The tiny body burst apart, leaving a sticky red stain on the carpet. In the same second, several other creatures jabbed their sharp snouts into her hand. Her nerves responded with searing pain. With a scream, Elizabeth flung them off herself. Needle snouts. That's who they are. That's what the remedy was sent for. She remembered, staring at the bloody dots on her skin. Without hesitation, the girl moved to the other end of the sofa and reached for the closet door. Dozens of needle snouts, like angry birds, followed her, furiously poking their snouts into the upholstery. Elizabeth pulled out the astroturf jaws from the box and wound the key several times counterclockwise. The toy came alive in her hands, its rough tongue twisted, and sharp teeth clicked menacingly. Frightened, Elizabeth dropped the jaws, and they began to hop across the carpet. The tiny sharp-snout creatures squeaked in terror and scattered like mice at the sight of a cat. The frenzied jaws caught one of them. The tiny body burst, and red droplets splattered across the carpet. The jaws clicked their tongue and continued the hunt. Another little rascal was caught. A bloody rain sprayed in all directions. Not understanding what was happening, Elizabeth jumped off the sofa and ran to the bathroom. She wanted to wash the small wounds as quickly as possible. The skin around the punctures had swollen and puffed up. It looked dangerous. But as soon as she bent over the faucet, something horrible burst out of the drain. It was a worm, thick, dirty pink, and long, like a python. It stretched almost to the ceiling. Then its body curved into a question mark. Elizabeth didn't immediately perceive what was happening as reality. She simply couldn't believe that such a thing could occur in her bathroom. And then the long monster opened its maw and lunged sharply, like a snake. It almost sank its teeth into the girl, but she managed to leap away. The giant worm protruding from the drain prepared for a new attack. With a scream, Elizabeth jumped out of the bathroom and slammed the door shut. Her apartment had become a place of terror and chaos. In the living room, sharp-snout critters fled from the hungry jaws, and now this worm too. Finally, the girl began to piece things together. Thoughts, like puzzle pieces, fell into place. The old woman had cursed her home, muttering about a bathroom worm and sharp spikes. And then that guy had brought the countermeasure. Apparently, he wasn't an enemy. Who he was remained unknown, but he wasn't an enemy. The jaws were managing their task, catching almost all the tiny parasites. But pouring liquid into the pipe against the drain worm was already too late. It had emerged. Elizabeth locked herself in her room, unsure of what to do next. The punctures on her hands and leg itched terribly. Exhausted from the nerve-wracking tension, she thought it was time to leave the apartment and try to find help. And suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by the courier's call. Elizabeth rushed to the door, hoping to call the guy back. To her disappointment, he was already gone, leaving a new package at the doorstep. Without hesitation, the girl picked it up and carried it to her room. Inside the box was a small glass vial with a pipette on the lid. The label read, "A drop for unwanted eyes." She even frowned, not understanding what it meant. She was about to put the vial away when something wild began to happen to her hand. The skin where she had scratched the wound split open, and real eyeballs emerged, bulging like blisters, alive and mobile, just like Elizabeth's own, green with a bright yellow ring around the pupil. On her right hand, 3 eyes had grown, the first between her index finger and thumb, the second under her pinky, the third on her wrist. Another eyeball swelled on her leg. All of them stared sharply and attentively. The girl screamed. She couldn't stop her own scream. Her vision turned into a dizzying kaleidoscope. She saw the ceiling, the wall, and her screaming face all at once. This whirl caused panic, nausea, and an urge to vomit. Elizabeth realized she would go insane if she didn't stop it. She needed to pull herself together, calm down, and regain her balance. The remedy. She'd been sent a remedy. There it was, drops for unwanted eyes. The girl unscrewed the cap and drew the clear liquid into a dropper. It was hard to navigate with such flickering vision, but she managed. Carefully, she applied the drops to the delicate surface of each eye, on her wrist and ankle. The sensations were unexpectedly intense, burning in pain like acid. But the magic worked. The extra eyes immediately began to shrink and close up. In less than 5 minutes, they were gone. Her skin was unmarked, and her vision returned to normal. Elizabeth cried with joy. Her body was back to normal. It was already starting to get dark outside. The entire day had passed like a whirlwind of madness. Elizabeth was so exhausted from the struggle that she fell asleep the moment her head hit the pillow. The next morning began with a strange noise. Elizabeth opened her eyes and regretfully realized that yesterday's events had not just been a nightmare. The room was in disarray. A torn box and a glass vial lay on the floor. The door was ajar. Sticky red stains were everywhere in the hallway, and from the kitchen came the sound of breaking dishes and disgusting chewing. The girl placed her feet on the cold floor and got out of bed. She was too drained for fear. She just wanted to see what was happening in the kitchen. She walked down the hallway and cautiously peeked inside. The refrigerator was open, and its contents were scattered on the floor: a broken jar of jam, a torn milk bag, and vegetable scraps. Amid this chaos, a sinister little monster was frolicking. It was the size of a small dog, but had nothing in common with household pets. This creature had no skin, only exposed muscles stretched over bones. All 4 limbs resembled chubby infant hands with short fingers, and its head was like a ball with a terrifying toothy maw. Elizabeth recognized it by those teeth. The wind-up jaws that had devoured all the pincushions had grown flesh and were now devouring everything in sight to develop its body further. The little monster was greedily tearing apart a raw chicken carcass. It was a predator, hungry for meat. Elizabeth shuddered at the thought of what would happen when the food in the fridge ran out. I have to get out of here before it's too late, she thought. And then the doorbell rang. It hadn't even stopped ringing before Elizabeth opened the door. But there was no one in the stairwell. Only a flat box lay on the floor, as if someone had left it there and vanished into thin air. The girl ripped open the packaging right in the hallway. Inside was a music record, a black vinyl disc covered with numerous scratches. The paper label was so old that nothing could be deciphered. Along with the record, there was a handwritten note in neat handwriting: "Play it when the years grow." Elizabeth immediately realized it was another puzzle. She looked again at the monster in the kitchen. Having devoured half of the large carcass, it had grown denser. New sinews and muscles wrapped around its bones, and small buds of ear flaps appeared on the sides of its skull. Elizabeth remembered that an old record player lay on the top shelf in the living room, and she hoped it still worked. Gripped by fear and hope, she ran to the closet. The bulky wooden-case record player was indeed in its place, as if waiting for its moment. How fortunate that her father had once refused to throw it away. The girl pulled it out, unwound the cord, and plugged it into the outlet. The old device, awakened from years of slumber, crackled, spitting out noise and static. Elizabeth remembered well how her father had taught her to use it in childhood and easily set the record in place. The needle touched the vinyl surface, and a creaky song began to play from the speakers. Suddenly, the melody was drowned out by a piercing scream from the kitchen, followed by a loud pop. There was no more chewing or clattering teeth. Elizabeth rushed there and saw an even greater mess. The walls, windows, and even the ceiling were splattered with red slime. The little monster lay lifeless on the floor. Its body had curled into an awkward ball. Almost nothing was left of its head. It had exploded from the old melody, leaving behind a bloody mass. In the living room, the cheerful song continued to play, "At the very gates of paradise, my Elizabeth." Outside, it was already completely dark. The song sounded innocent and carefree, but Elizabeth was trembling with tension. Her right eye twitched, and her heart ached from constant stress. But she needed to calm down and think. It seemed that almost all the problems had been solved. In this chain of horrors, one last link remained. Behind the bathroom door, a giant worm hissed. There were only 2 days left before her parents and brother returned. She couldn't let them see this. The girl retrieved the last box from the closet, which contained the remedy for the drain worm. Then, using a kitchen knife, she punctured holes in the bottle's cap. It was a risky and desperate move. But, deciding to see it through to the end, the girl flung open the bathroom door. The slimy pink worm immediately reared up and opened its black maw. Thick saliva dripped from its teeth, and it hissed menacingly. Summoning the remnants of her courage, Elizabeth did not retreat. She gripped the bottle tightly and directed a stream of green liquid straight into the creature's maw. The air filled with a sour, chemical scent. Bubbles frothed in the worm's throat, and thick steam shot up toward the ceiling. Choking on the acid, the toothy monster began to thrash uncontrollably. It coughed, wheezed, convulsed, and finally collapsed, glowing faintly at the edge of the bathtub. Elizabeth dropped the bottle with the remaining liquid. She couldn't believe it had worked. The drain worm was dead. Silently, she returned to her room and sat on the bed, trying to calm the trembling in her hands. A light melody continued playing in the living room. The whole house was turned upside down, dirt and stench everywhere. What had the apartment become in such a short time? Elizabeth felt like a squeezed lemon, but she still set to work cleaning. Shampoos, laundry detergent, rags, and brushes were all put to use. Foam filled the house. Suppressing her disgust, the girl packed the remains of the creature into garbage bags and took them to the dumpster along with the empty boxes. Now the house was free from her grandmother's curses, and this story remained a secret. Elizabeth decided to forget it, as if it had never happened. Only one mystery remained unsolved. Who was that enigmatic courier? She wanted to believe he wasn't part of the dark forces. On the contrary, perhaps that guy had entered the nightmare as a benevolent guardian and helped her overcome her troubles.